Have you ever wanted to try out a different operating system, but didn't want to worry about the risks that might occur of you installing it instead of your native OS that you're running right now? See, certain risks always come when installing a new operating system, right? Maybe the install fails and you risk losing all the data you have on your drives because you didn't back it up and you might have formatted that drive. Or maybe the install goes all according to plan. Maybe you're using a fresh drive, but you're not sure if down the line maybe you're going to want to switch to a different operating system because maybe it's just not floating your boat per se. Running a virtual machine is a beautiful thing in that sense. Now, for those unaware, a virtual machine is basically the idea of being able to run a different operating system on top of your own operating system in almost like a virtual environment per se. That makes sense, right? Now, virtual machines have a lot of different benefits. One, kind of as mentioned, it mitigates the risk of things going wrong. Because with a virtual machine, you could basically just shut it down and run back to your own native OS without any major risks there. And it also allows you to try out different operating systems to see if you like them. Maybe you're coding a program in Windows, but you need to see how it runs in a Linux environment. In that case, you can install Linux like we're going to do here today and see how optimized, per se, that program runs. Or maybe, like some people I've seen, you want to go back in time. You want to go toy around with Windows XP, Windows 98, Windows 95, Windows 3.1. Maybe next step. Maybe different operating systems that no longer exist. But because of driver compatibility, you can't really run those operating systems in a great scenario natively these days. You know, a lot of the times as newer hardware comes out, driver support only stays with modern platforms. And within a virtual machine, a lot of the times you can trick the machine into being able to kind of utilize modern resources, but at the same time, not really. I've seen people go back to Windows XP and virtual machines to play older video games that no longer are like natively supported in Windows, say 10 or 11. So in the purpose of today's video, I want to teach you guys how to install a virtual machine kind of easy using VirtualBox, which is a program by Oracle, and just how well, say, a virtual machine would run on your native hardware, and is it worth doing, even just to try out. So that's what we're going to do, and let's get into it. So now we're ready to install our virtual machine. I do have Oracle VirtualBox open, and I already downloaded the ISO for Ubuntu Linux version 24.04. Now, Ubuntu Linux is one of the most popular versions of Linux out there, and it is free to download from their website. They update it all the time as well. So once you have VirtualBox open, we're going to go ahead and click New. Now, you're going to make a name for your virtual machine. I'm just going to call it Ubuntu, and then you're going to select your ISO image. Mine's already on the desktop, so we're just going to click it. If you noticed, it immediately identifies the type and the version of Linux, so already off to a good start. Now, you're going to go into the hardware section, and you want to allocate a certain amount of RAM and your processor cores for this virtual machine, and that does affect performance. So I'm going to give it, just for the heck of it, 6 gigs of RAM. I doubt it needs that much at all. Linux is very lightweight and not really resource hungry in itself. There's still versions of Linux out there that run on 486 processors. Now, to put that into perspective for anyone who doesn't know, a 486 processor was a processor that was out in the early 90s. So the fact that there's still kind of up-to-date versions of Linux out there that minimum specs is that says a lot about the Linux environment. Now, I'm going to give it a 10.5, I guess, gig virtual hard drive. Now, what this does is this creates a virtual drive that's almost like its own separate partition for this virtual machine. However, it doesn't actually partition the drive you're installing it on. It basically just creates this big, it's like a VDI file. It's a virtual disk image, and pretty much everything that you do when you're in the virtual machine is contained within that image. So once you set this up, we're going to go ahead and we're going to click Finish. Now, this is powering up automatically. I've not seen it do this with any other operating system. So it boots into Grub, and we're going to click try or install Ubuntu. I'm wondering what settings it gave it offhand, because you can go in there and modify the settings, which if this doesn't load, we might have to look at a little bit of that, but Ubuntu is very compatible usually with VirtualBox, so I don't know if we're going to have to inherently do that. Like, trying to load. We got the bootloader very quickly, so that's definitely a good sign. Looks like... Oh, there we go. So as you can see, Ubuntu 24.04 is loading. And what I love about a lot of these Linux distros is they allow you to have a live demonstration of it, where even if you were to just put it on a flash drive or a CD, you can kind of play around in the operating system without even having to install it. However, to get better performance, if you were going to be using this natively, I definitely recommend installing it for a lot of different benefits. I don't really think you can necessarily save things when you're using it from a CD image. Also, you're running it off a CD, so you're kind of limited to those speeds anyway. Does, I guess, take a moment to load. I would have thought this was going to load up a lot quicker. But we'll see just how long this currently takes. More video memory, because I noticed by default it was only giving it 16 megabytes. Within VirtualBox natively, you can go up to 128 megabytes, and that's all I changed. And I wasn't getting this loading screen before. We just kind of got that little message that was saying it was Ubuntu 24.04, and I'm wondering if that was a video memory thing. Like, it couldn't display the motion graphics, so it just kind of made it a little, like, prompt showing what it was doing. I'm also hoping that by doing that, this does end up loading a lot quicker. Because to get to this screen, it ended up being a lot faster than it was the previous time. Is Here we go. That wasn't that long of a boot up. As I mentioned in the little intro video, you don't really get all the resources that you would natively running a guest operating system, but you do have the ability to adjust that with more RAM, more processor cores, based on what your actual system specs are and what you can allocate to the virtual machine. Now, it does seem like it's trying to load. We're getting an image here. There we go. So we do have the installer loading. This is always a good sign. Ubuntu experienced an internal error. Do we want to... Let's see what these details are. I mean, overall, so far it is running nice and kind of smooth within here. It's always interesting to me, seeing an operating system run within an operating system. Authentication required. We're just going to cancel it. I wonder if it crashed because I shut the virtual machine down. Maybe that's what that was doing. Alright, so we'll not send now. We'll click next to install as English. Customize Ubuntu to your needs before. Fine, just generically. Keyboard. Showing is connected. It is showing a wired connection, so we'll use a wired connection. It lets me. Guess not. We'll do not connect to the internet for now. We will install Ubuntu on this virtual drive. we want to do an interactive installation because we don't have this auto install YML. Default selection. All third-party software for graphics and Wi-Fi hardware. I wonder how that's going to turn out, but let's see. Now, keep this in mind. It's been forever since I've actually run a virtual machine. I wanted to get back into it with my new PC build. I want to do a manual installation just to make sure it's noticing that 11 gig drive. Okay, cool. Go back then and do just erase disk and install because it's the only one. It's create your account. We'll call it double G 390. Password. Get something simple. Weak. Super generic because I probably won't keep the virtual box in a state like this after the install. It would also be nice if I could fully, type. Where am I location? Let's do New York for the time zone. Virtual. Do the install. Let's see how quickly this actually installs. I mean, it looks like it's moving along. I did give it 6 gigs of RAM, so it should relatively install this nice and quick. I haven't used Ubuntu since probably version 2004, I think I played around with. Installing the system, so copy the files already. Now, Linux is getting interesting over time because a lot of apps that were never natively supported on Linux are finally making their way over. As you can see, Spotify has a Linux version of the app. I believe Steam has a Linux version of the app, and it runs games natively through Steam. I don't know if all games are supported, but I know a good amount of them are because of the Vulkan API. Develop with the best of open source. Now, one thing you'll learn with Linux is because it's open source, if you've never played around with it, there are a lot of different apps out there that users just kind of make, and the code becomes open source so people can just upgrade them almost as a community. And it's a beautiful thing. It's your own creativity if you're. As you can see, Blender supported Audacity for sound editing. Then Live, Godot. I don't know what either of these two things are. Blender, I believe, is photo and video editing, if I'm not mistaken. Never actually used Blender on itself. I've used Audacity. Great for gaming. See, it's showing the Steam library. You have Steam, Discord, OBS is supported, Feral Game Mode. It's interesting how much is coming over to Linux now, which makes it a very viable operating system for the most part. Linux is also a very secure operating system, so I don't want to say I definitely recommend switching over from Windows, but it's definitely worth giving it a shot, especially in a virtual machine, just because you can learn to see if you like it or not. I'm wondering what's happening with this like flashingness on this side of the screen. Hopefully tied to the dollar. I like how it also advertised now, like what is supported. You use Thunderbird for email, LibreOffice, Microsoft Teams, Slack. To see Microsoft products on Linux is always very interesting to me because, they are the competition. But Office has been on Mac OS for forever, I believe. LibreOffice has come a long way for it being an open source Office suite. Probably almost done installing. I want to think it's showing these just as different like progress marks for the installer, if that makes sense. It's funny because what this reminds me of down here of how it's showing the lines this way is like almost when you were downloading games from the Wii Shop channel as a kid, maybe an adult, depending when you had your Wii. I was a kid, but it's like when Mario's jumping through the blocks and coins start popping, and then as it's almost done, it just shows like a million of them, kind of like how it was showing like three or four right there. All right, so as you can see, the installation finished. I kind of like this crown logo with the Ubuntu logo kind of right there. What we're going to do is click restart now. Now, in a perfect scenario, this should just reboot directly into the operating system, not back into the installer. But if it does, all we have to do is unmount the ISO. Like it was toying with the screen resolution for a second. Looks like this might be booting directly into the OS because it didn't even give me the Grow loader. So let's see how quickly this boots when it's coming directly from the VDI versus the ISO image. Right now, it's very comparable. I wonder if there's a way because I'm using an SSD. I wonder if there's a way to like somehow utilize those SSD speeds. But I think because of it making it a VDI image, thinking it's a virtual hard disk, I kind of feel like it's using slower like SATA speeds, possibly even IDE speeds, but don't quote me on that. At least it's loading that with like a little disk image thing there. And it does look like it has network connectivity as well. Adapter one connected, so I wonder if it's acting as a bridge connection. And here we are. It loaded. Now, this is an Ubuntu Pro. Security updates, 10 years of support. That's crazy. We're gonna skip that for now though. I might want to look into that in the future. We're not gonna share system data because virtual machine. And let's look at the App Center, for example, here. Because I want to see what's kind of in here is being featured. Android Studio program from Android on here. That's kind of cool. Let's install that. What else? Let's see. Microsoft PowerShell's on here now. That never used to be here, I don't think. But we're gonna finish it anyway. Um, so Firefox is the default web browser here. Well, let's see how quickly it loads up like websites. Just because it's using your own connection. Let's go ESPN. It resolved the DNS. It is taking a little while to load. I bet that could be fixed by just like tweaking the settings a little bit. I want to see update software update. I know with Linux, it used to always be imperative to look for like updates the moment you opened it. I wonder too if we can insert the guest edition CD image. A lot of times when you do that, you kind of get a better experience with the OS. Things. Let's see the terminal here. Being a little sluggish when trying to load stuff, I'm noticing. Oh, but there is the VirtualBox image. So this might help a little bit because there's a bunch of different things on here. And it kind of knows what to install offhand. So, with that being said, we're going to enter in our password here, which I just made that a generic password anyway. But I don't think where I want to be. Updated software has been issued. What software do we have for that? Oh, what if we just do run software? There we go. That's all we had to do. I was hoping it was going to be something simple like that. Um, uncompressed VirtualBox editions that bzip2 not found. Well, bzip2 tar try again. Interesting. Well, we'll take a look at that later. I'm gonna install these up. Let's see if it notices anything different. Or what we can do is Google it, right? Because now that we have a web browser open, Ubuntu guest editions VirtualBox. See, now it's kind of running nice and smooth. We're going to copy that command. Terminal. Or if something else is using it because we're installing those updates. Or I can alternatively just kind of see what that error is that we're getting. bzip2 not found. Oh, that simple? Just it's a sudo command to just download it. If this works, then we'll go into more things about this. All right, so I was able to get those guest editions installed. I had to reboot the virtual machine and then rerun that file to download the, was it the bzip2 that it was looking for, and then it went. Now I want you guys to notice something. I did open up YouTube, and as we have internet, I do have sound, as you can somewhat hear. Playing this just for a little bit, we do get video quality. However, one of the big things I'm noticing with this that's a little rough is that because the video memory is so low compared to modern standards, even by bringing down the resolution, that was like 360p, it's kind of choppy. Now, certain things I think work cool with a virtual machine. If we're doing non-graphically intensive things, at least in using VirtualBox, it should work fine. Like I installed Mines, which is basically a Linux version of Minesweeper, and I'm dead immediately. But as you can see, this is running fine because it's not really using a lot of graphically or any graphically intense processes. If we were going to be opening terminal, if I could spell, this would work fine. There's really no lag with typing or anything, so that's cool, and pretty much we get decent responsiveness. I did move this to full screen mode, so it kind of acts as a separated operating system, but one thing I wanted to point out is only certain things really are going to work within VirtualBox. So if we're going to the system hardware, first off, it notices it's a VirtualBox, but it does notice my processor and the 4 cores that I gave it, the system memory, the disk capacity, but graphics. One of the things I noticed is it doesn't pass through the graphics card I have. It uses like this generic SVGA 3D build, which is why I couldn't recommend, at least in this aspect of it, gaming on a VirtualBox. But just to toy around with the operating system, it should be fine. Now, who is this for? As I went into this video, I think if you wanted to toy around with a different operating system that's different than your native one, installing it through a virtual machine is a cool alternative to kind of get a feel on, would you want to switch over? See, one of the things with virtual machines, as I kind of alluded to earlier, is they are kind of limited with what they can do. However, I do know certain companies use different virtual machines to host as servers for like their NAS drives and all that, which in that case, that can really work wonders depending how many resources you are devoting to it and what you're using that virtual machine for instead of having a dedicated machine to host it. You can use a virtual machine if you're using it as a server, I believe, to divide it into multiple different servers and have them all running concurrently as needed on a centralized machine. Now, I don't know how they do that offhand, so don't quote me if you need advice on any of that. However, I personally would like to use a virtual machine, just as I mentioned, to kind of get a grasp on different operating systems, see what they're all about, see how they run. This isn't necessarily running awful. It is a little slow because it's passing through like the hardware from the generic, not from the generic, from your host computer, which is your actual computer. You can web browse. You can somewhat play YouTube videos. I have the sound working, as you heard. However, you might be able to get certain things working with a little bit more like tweaks. There are different virtual machines out there, such as VMware. I chose VirtualBox, and they might have different features. I believe this would run a lot better if you were able to pass through the graphics card, and there might be a way to do that. I just don't know how. But for what it's worth, if you wanted to toy with different operating systems, especially operating systems from the past that aren't super resource intensive, whether it be Windows XP, Next Step, Windows 3.1, Even that version of Linux I mentioned earlier that runs off 486 processors, installing them through a virtual machine just to kind of toy around with them is kind of cool. I don't see myself ever using this as a daily driver, but just to maybe toy around with a new version of an operating system before we decide to dual boot it, because that is another option, might be the step you want to take. So I'm going to end the video here with that, and I have a question for you all. One, do you know how to pass through GPUs to this? Because then we might do an updated video. But two, would you see yourself using a virtual machine? And if so, for what? Did you find this tutorial helpful? I know installing it was a little hairy, but I wanted to show every little part of the installation process just in case you guys came into any similar errors that I did and what we might be able to do to overcome that. Until next time, guys, thank you for watching the video. Give it a thumbs up and a comment if you can, I'd appreciate it. And I will catch you later.